Yeah, I won't give you the sheet. Cheryl.
What's that?
For the bench.
I think we've gotten through our tech support problems here. Got the owl going. Eleanor or Gary, can you hear us? Okay.
Can hear you.
And I think we're ready to open the meeting. I get the what is this? Okay, I think we're ready to call the special meeting of the Needham Housing Authority Board of Commissioners to order. Since we are doing this as a hybrid meeting, we need to call the roll. And Reg Foster is here.
Eleanor Evans is here.
Ed Shivler here.
Penny Kirk here.
And we got everybody, so that's good. I also would like to welcome our two guests here tonight, Margaret Moran, who appears in the lower part of my screen with headphones on, and Natalie Jansen, the upper part of my screen, who does not have headphones. Both of them are my thing. So great. We are doing a hybrid meeting as permitted under the revisions to the emergency revisions to the public meeting law. We have a special meeting that's been duly posted with the Needham Town Clerk last Friday. And the special meeting is focused on two agenda items only, none of our regular business, which we will attend to at our next meeting. One is that we have a draft budget for the Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative that's been worked on for the last few months for the commissioners to review and also to have resident input if we leave our residents here or dialed into us are interested in doing that. And then we've been asked a couple of weeks ago to submit comments on the latest working draft, the housing, Needham Housing Plan. I submitted comments on that plan on behalf of myself as an individual, very interested individual, but I also wanted to provide the commissioners an opportunity to find additional comments to make or input that we want to give to the working group, because they're going to be really off the races next month. Ed Shivler is our representative on the working group. And they're sort of honing in by mid to end of fall of a final soup to nuts working draft here. So, time is of the essence for us to get our comments in. So we'll go to the Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative budget. I'm going to put up a presentation, which hopefully will be readable by the people at home. I don't see it. Where did it go? Let's try this. I'm just again here. Here, open recent. There it is. Back to Zoom. And share screen. So Eleanor or Gary, how is that looking size wise at home?
Looks good to me.
Okay, so lots of, okay, large enough to read and all that, okay. Super.
Although it's just on the title, so I like, when you
It's only
get
on the
the-
top. So you can only see the,
I mean,
or
yeah, so if you scroll down, then, I mean, so I could, maybe if you scroll down to
can you
the,
see, let me get it sized right here. So if I make it smaller, can you see the whole page there?
well, I mean, I just see the first page where it says Needham Housing Authority
Yeah,
2021.
that's fine. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. I missed.
But I just was wondering, can you just scroll down to a page that has the budget on it so that with the small?
We're gonna do that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to make sure I could see it okay.
Yeah. How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
Boy, you even see it. No,
Oh.
I can make this a little bigger.
Don't worry.
I think. No, but this-
No. It's the
Yeah,
big one.
that's too
It's
big.
a little.
Okay, great.
Okay, no problem.
So I'm going to start off with a little recap and introduction of what we've been doing for the last year and also what is before us tonight. And then I'm going to turn it over to the Cambridge Housing Authority for additional comments and our executive management for any additional comments. And then we're going to have board discussion and Q&A about just anything that comes up, been presented. We'll do resident input. We have 2 residents here tonight, and I don't know how many we have on here. And then we'll see if everything is sufficiently pulled together enough for the board to vote to approve or provisionally approve the budget. We also are going to ask for the approval of 3 new statements of work from the Cambridge Housing Authority, which represents their work they're going to do for the next year and a half, year and a quarter, mapped to this budget. So the first page here we have is major milestones. Just a brief recap. We hired the Cambridge Housing Authority last late June or July. They started 2021, right in the middle of the pandemic, another peak. A major deliverable that was delivered in October and reviewed by the board, and it was board training and staff training about, was called the preliminary repositioning strategy, which is sort of the overall approach to both the state and federal properties when it comes to preservation and modernization and redevelopment. December 2021 marked the approval of the ARPA funding bill. This is the ARPA funds that the state received in Chapter 102 of the state. And in there was a $1.25 million award designated for the Needham Housing Authority for modernizing and redeveloping their state properties, the vast majority of which is Linden and Chambers, 152 units here. We also in December 2021 submitted CPA funding awards, and after going through the process that lasted up through April, spring town meeting saw fit to award us another 1.487 million in funds, and the lion's share was for Linden Chambers to hire an A&E designer to figure out how to realistically redevelop Linden and Chambers. And then in August of 22, after several months of work, another major deliverable came in. The preliminary or second drafts actually of what is called existing condition reports for our federal properties for Seabeds, Cook, and High Rock. And that's a critical analysis because it documents, the condition, the existing conditions, and adds up to how many millions of dollars of repairs that are needed to sort of bring the buildings up to snuff for the next 20 years. And, just to give a sense from the preliminary reports here, the seabeds total was $15.8 million over 20 years. The Cook total was 13.7 million over 20 years. The High Rock total was almost $32 million over 20 years. This is way beyond the kind of funding that we have on an annual basis from our federal.
That would be if we didn't do the remodernization.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you document that because when you apply to reposition our federal properties, and that term means we're going to apply to move them from Section 9 of the original 1937 Public Housing Funding Act over to Section 8, which we all know from as the place where Section 8 vouchers come from. But Section 8 also funds public housing like what we have, but has more generous calculations for how much subsidy we should be receiving. We can take advantage of that if we work hard to get there. And that would free up money to do maybe not all of these renovations, but a good chunk of them. And it would also allow us to borrow money because of the nature of the way the Section 8 funding is structured. So that brings us up to the present day. The A2 there shows what lies ahead. Again, major milestones. We need to finish out the repositioning strategy. The board expects to meet on that with Cambridge Housing Authority with an updated draft of the analysis and provide additional input and fine tuning. We expect to select a Linden Chambers designer, A&E designer firm that stands for Architect and Engineers. I neglected to mention that in August 4th, 2022, we did put out an RFP, and lo and behold, wonderfully, we received 6 great proposals last Wednesday. So there's a couple-month process of first state review at the state level for the next month or so, reference checking. We have a local selection committee that has been formed and approved by the board. 5 Needham citizens, they will receive the top unranked 3 to 5 proposals from the state designer selection committee, and they will run a process to interview in person the candidates, the 3 to 5 top firms, and make a recommendation to the board, which we expect to get in October of 2022. Probably our October board meeting is when it would be scheduled, if we can stay on schedule. Later this fall, we will be receiving in October, we'll be receiving the final version of the Cook and Seabred's existing commission's reports. They're closer to the finish line because they're newer buildings. The High Rock ones have been, we've been really reviewing them, decided that there were some more things that need to be looked into, testing of the concrete pads, which are allegedly, from tenant complaints, letting moisture into the buildings. Likewise for the exterior siding, more testing there. So we expect that one to come in around November 2022, that month sometime. And armed with those documents, we'll be able to finalize the repositioning strategy paper and talk about the recommendations from the Cambridge Housing Authority as to what we should do. And there are many moving parts, and pros and cons on how we approach it. We're not going to get into that tonight. But ultimately the management and the board need to pick amongst those options the best and most advantageous way for Needham Housing Authority to proceed. Then that will lead to Cambridge Housing Authority on behalf, or us, with the assistance of Cambridge Housing Authority, to finalize the repositioning applications and submit them to the federal government. That those applications, are supposed to be turned around in like 90 days or so. So it's, pretty imminent in terms of getting approval. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just following a well-worn path here. And then in December, we'll be submitting another round of CPA funding applications for reasons that will become more apparent in a few minutes here. Town meeting will, in Q1 2023, we'll be expecting to get that approval from HUD of the repositioning applications. And also that will position us to be able to do a process, another RFS process, request for services proposals, to hire an A&E designer firm to actually do the design of the renovations and modernizations and fixes and everything else for Seabeds and Cook. It's looking like we won't be doing simultaneously High Rock because there's more to be done. There's more funding to be raised that hasn't happened. And a concern, strong recommendation on the part of Cambridge Housing Authority that we don't get going with too many things at the same time because, we're not, we don't have a huge staff here. And there'll be a lot of decision-making that board and staff and residents need to make as we go along with the Linden Chambers and the Seabeds Cooks processes here. We expect, if we're successful, that there will be town meeting approval of whatever CPA funding applications we submit this December 1st, and that will be a town meeting in May 2023. Then looking further into 2023, and this is all covered by the budget we're about to review, which is why I'm going over this in brief here. A biggie is to figure out not only what we want to do here, what we want to build, but whatever it isn't covered by the existing zoning, and we don't we will have to negotiate with the town, the neighbors, and just come to some a meeting of the minds on how to proceed and get some confirmation of that. And that confirmation may or may not require town meeting approval in spring of 2023 or in the fall of 2023. It may not require it, but and that's all going to need to be worked out. And then we get into the last 2 quarters of 2023, where we'll be completing the designs of the schematic designs of the changes that we're going to be able to fund at Seabeds and Cook. We'll be looking over lots of other things that are critically important, like tenant relocation plans and so forth, which haven't even been thought about yet. This is temporary relocation while their apartments are being worked on, and then they can move back in. And of course, funding. We may be getting a lot more money from the Section 8 repositioning, but then you've got to come up with an overall funding plan of how you're going to use that extra money. Secure mortgages. There's also other sources of hard and soft funding, like tax credits and so forth. That all needs to be worked out in that last second half of the year period. And we need to actually do a similar thing with respect to Linden Chambers. By then we would have some idea of what could be built here and how it could be built, and what, something that's acceptable to the town and the residents and the board and the management. And then most importantly, not only the resident relocation plan, again, temporary, but it's more time that would be needed for a redevelopment, but also a phasing, because there's unlikely to be enough money to do the whole site at the same time. And it would be hugely disruptive in a way that I don't think anybody would find very attractive anyway. But there's certainly ideas that have been floating around for a few years, since 2012 or 13, about how we could start with a phase 1, which would be something like 32 units going to 64 units or something like that. And just be, and it would probably be over on the Linden Street side, the north of this part of the property here towards Oak Street. And, if you just took the 32 units that are on the other side of the big parking lot in the middle there, and you just go up one story, then that's how you get 64 units. So, but again, all of that's back on the back of the envelope, conceptualizing that's been done in the last few years. And this is with the aid of this firm that we're going to be hiring in October, and with the guidance of the Cambridge Housing Authority, we'll be really figuring out how to get this all done in the next year. And then there's a one-liner, calendar year 24 and 25. If we sort of follow this plan and these work orders that we've got, then we might be looking at actually doing some construction. So that's the overall. If it's overall sort of pictured, I want to just, I can pause for questions here, but I think maybe it would be better just to hold them till the end while you see the whole picture. Is that all right with board members and with you, Eleanor, here? So in the board packet that was distributed the other day are the final draft task orders for task orders 2, 3, and 4. Basically, the plan is to retire task order number 1, which is the one we've been working under and was approved by the board in August 2021. There are a few work items that still need to be completed, but most of everything, basically substantially everything has been done. And anything that hasn't been done, we've made a decision along the way that it doesn't need to be done, now that we know a lot more about what we're doing here. Task order 2 is then going to take over from task order 1, and it'd be sort of the general PRI, program planning and management. So just, when the overall management of this that Cambridge is providing for us as our outsourced planning and redevelopment department. And a couple of the remaining task order number 1 tasks will go into there and get completed under task order number 2. So that's, comprises work item number 1 and work item number 2. And then there's another placeholder in there that Cambridge recommended that we have in there. Every few months, there's some new acquisition opportunity or something to look into. So we have had 2 just in the first year here. And so that's just a placeholder for, it's an other services placeholder where if targets of opportunity or other things come up, they might be funded out of that work item. This is all, again, as you'll see in a minute, tied into the budget we're about to review here. Task order number 3 is all things seabeds and Cook, with respect to doing the preservation and modernization there. There's a whole bunch of redevelopment tasks that I'm not going to go into, but you had a chance to look at in your board packet. That's what we're going to be doing there, and accounting for it separately because there's some requirements to not mix up our federal and state things that we do on a going forward basis from here. Task order number 4 is the Linden Chambers redevelopment that I just described, and it's basically everything having to do with the master planning and the designer phase 1 that we put this RFS out for, and we'll hopefully be selecting a firm to help us with sometime in mid-October. There's also, conceptually in the budget, a placeholder for task order number 5, which would be High Rock Estates redevelopment, but we haven't developed that task order yet. When we do our Q&A and discussion, that bear in mind that the idea would be to either make changes or send us back to the drawing boards to work on more things, but otherwise, if everything seems to be in order from the board, that we would approve the executive director to execute those task orders tonight. And of course, those task orders represent the tasks, the work, the roadmap, the work plan that then leads us to the budget. And over the next last 4 months, one of the reasons it took us so long is we've really been sort of digging into trying to understand what is going to happen between now and at least the end of 2023 and have some sense of, 2024 as well. And this is the summary page from the budget handout I gave you, which you need a magnifying glass to read, but has the essential information. And again, we, the Needham Housing Authority, were very reliant on the Cambridge Housing Authority for guidance on what is the right level of money to budget by way of expenditures for the next 15, 16 months. So it adds up, and you'll see it in the purple there, to 4.271 million, which is when it started to come together over the last month or so. I started to mention to, in board meetings to other board members that, this is a substantial number one, and, lends a lot of credence to Eleanor Evans, who originally pointed out at our last December budget meeting that we should really be doing the discipline of figuring this all out and reviewing it with the board before we go forward much further. You'll see that here that there are 5 major projects that have been identified. Number one, we're calling,
Yeah.
we're calling initial planning and development and federal repositioning. Basically, that's everything we've been doing since July 2021 until the present. And we're going to do a sort of cutover date on July 1st, 2022 with the new task order number 2, because with the way the Cambridge accounting system works, all the expenses have been from them. That's a very good cutover. So the task order 2 will be starting up in July 2022, taking over from task order 1, which will be retired. And so that's task order 2. The third project is the Seabeds Cook Preservation and Modernization. The fourth project is Linden Chambers redevelopment that I've just described. And again, a placeholder here for the High Rock Estates redevelopment project. We put a little bit of money in here because we might want to consider that as a CPA funding request this December. But the strong recommendation on Cambridge's part, as I mentioned before, is for us to finish out the repositioning analysis, but not start up a third front in the redevelopment and modernization war here that we're going to be starting to prosecute. Another reason is some of these options we will look at required us that when we get the repositioning option approved, which, for Seabeds and Cook was next, first quarter 2023, you actually have to proceed on construction immediately. And we don't, we would not be under those options ready to proceed on anything with High Rock Homes. So that timing consideration will all be discussed further at our next meeting on the repositioning strategy here. So the period of time covered for the budgets is between July 2021 and December 2023. That should say 22, shouldn't it? No, 2023, I'm wrong. So, and then the other thing that we took a lot of time thinking through is at a high level, what are the big major buckets for expenses, which I've just highlighted on the screen there. This has to map into what Cambridge Housing Authority can report to us easily, and also map into what our accounting systems can accommodate, because one of the requirements we're trying to meet is to have regular budget versus actual reporting on the PRI once we approve the budget here. So the 5 categories there are in no order of importance, but Needham Housing Authority third-party services. So for example, with the A&E designer services for Linden Chambers, we will be contracting with the A&E firm directly, not doing it through the Cambridge Housing Authority. That's a big example of it. And that's why you see such a big number for that, there for that at expense. We have a placeholder here for NHA direct expenses, that would be a portion of Steve's time or Cheryl's time or Gary's time or something like, or other things that we spend out of our existing budget. We have made the decision for the time being not to try to break that out separately because Cambridge is mostly doing everything that needs to be done. But it does take a, not, inconsequential chunk of Steve's time, for example, in reviewing things and doing things. We think there's no point in trying to budget for this now, but we may want to start doing this in 2023 or 2024. We, for example, may, when I say we, I mean Steve, of course, may decide to bring on another staff member just to stay on top of everything that needs to be done from a, being on top of things point of view or from an accounting point of view, rather than sort of burden our current staff who has to make sure that we focus on our mission number one, the day-to-day management and operations. So that's why that's there. CHDA professional services is what we've been doing up until now. So this is right now, approximately, since this work order ends effective June 30th, 2021, this is sort of the current estimate of what's been spent from that need to be budgeted for Cambridge Housing Authority here. CHA third-party expenses is the third-party services firms that we hire via Cambridge. They call them their house doctors. The firms that did the existing conditions reports, DEETS is one of those. The ones that did the land survey, Feldman is another one of those. That's where Cambridge gets invoiced for those professional services and turns around and invoices them to us. And so that we thought that should be tracked separately here. And then, as always, there has to be an other or miscellaneous. Another thing I'm just going to point out of the budget is this is also direct expense and contingency. Right now, we haven't put any contingency in the budget. And that's a legitimate topic for conversation when we get to the discussion section. But the reason for that is we wanted to show the board what the budget actually looks like now without, adding 10% contingency or whatever. So that's why we did that. So again, keep a note of the color coding because I'm using this to tie it together down the road here. So our purple here, that purple over there, yes, it does, is a budget that the board is being asked to consider of 4.271 million, which is a big number. So then it's like, okay, so where is the funding coming from? So that's the next slide, section D here. And so there are two slides on this. One is the slide with what we're calling existing and committed sources of funding. These are funds that have already existed and been acquired or been applied for. And we're going to start keeping track of these in the budget reports and documents that we do quarterly here. And note the color line green. So we start off here with line number 1, which is the management fee, which we agreed calling the NHA Development Reserve, formerly the High Rock Developer Fee. So in years past, and many different boards, as we've been trying to get this initiative going, the board has said, yes, that 628,000 that we've been carrying on the books is going to be used for exactly what we're using it for now, which is to try to, redevelop, the next, the last 60 units of High Rock or the Linden Chambers or do the seabeds cook modernization. So this, basically it's for this budget, we're just continuing to reaffirm that that is what we're going to be using that money for. The next thing, the next three are CPA funding applications that we have submitted since and received, awarded since mid 2019. The first one, the 150,000, is what has been funding the Cambridge effort up until now. And that's been matched with NHA funds. So the proposal there was to, have a $300,000 budget. 150,000 of it would be come out of NHA funds like the management fee, and $150,000 would come from the CPA funds from Needham here. The line item number 3 there is a big request we worked really hard on last year, as everybody knows. And we were awarded $1.386 million to support this designer effort, A&E designer effort at Linden Chambers, to figure out how the heck to really redevelop this property and how to phase it, and working out temporary tenant relocation and zoning and wetlands and traffic and everything else. And the third one there is 81,978 for federal repositioning. And that basically were the costs of doing the High Rock Estates repositioning report. At the very last second, the town council ruled as ineligible doing the same work for Seabeds and Cook. Not something that I agreed with, or, I believe it's fair to say Cambridge agreed with, but that's what happened. And so here we are. And then there were 2 other proposals that we put in that were withdrawn, as I think we all know. And then there is a number of other funding sources where no decision has been reached, but is really on, some of them are on the table tonight to consider for meeting this overall. Remember the purple up here. Remember this number, 4.271 here. So the next page, E, section E, shows what has been being recommended by Cambridge Housing Authority, by management, with some caveats, and by me, on how we're going to meet the budget, the 2021-23 budget requirements, spending requirements of the PRI. So the color coding starts with yellow, which I think we all know about. It actually is available. We've met with DHCD. It's there to be used for Linden Chambers. And there are no issues. I left it there because part of the reason for this meeting is to basically, the board hasn't really officially ratified or approved that that's what we're going to do with this money, although it's obvious and there's nothing else to do with it. So that I left this on this funding source, put funding sources potentially available page that today you're receiving a request to approve all of the 1.25 million for use with the Linden Chambers pre-development tasks that I described earlier. Now, I'll jump down to 8 here. So 8 through 12, and it's in the green, is what's been emerging over the summer and be worked on further in the fall as possible, likely, defensible application, CPA funding applications that would go in on December 1st. These are not the final applications. You're not being asked to approve the final applications. That will, be happening in our November meeting before we submit them. But this is what's coming in to focus as not only something reasonable to ask for, something that would be supportable by the town all the way through town meeting. One of the areas that we still don't have in focus here, so it has a 0 in it. Let me get my cursor back here. is cursor, do your thing here. Seabeds Cook Construction. The town has a policy that it will be willing to fund part of the cost of doing something like the Seabeds Cook pre-development and construction that is eligible under the CPA under the CPA funding rules. So an example of that this last year that most everybody might have known about is the Emory Grover building. The school has been trying for years to redevelop that to be continue to be the office building for the whole central school staff, and it's also to preserve the building because it's one of our oldest buildings in town and the original high school, and many people consider it a historic treasure. And but CPA will not let you fund 100% of that with CPA funding because you're using it for office space. You're not using it for CPA purposes like housing or open space or recreation. So they have a method where they say, well, 15% of the overall designer costs and overall construction costs are related to preserving the historic building, new roofs, new exterior facade, et cetera, et cetera. And the other 85%, the town has to come up with money elsewhere. So that same logic can be applied to us with respect to Seabeds and Cook. And one of the reasons to consider that is the numbers I kind of gave you from the preliminary reports when we're looking for we were looking for $28 million if we were going to bring everything up to snuff. We probably could use some extra support funding wise for that. And then our Cambridge consultants have also repeated many times over what is logical, which is when we actually start applying for those other funding sources like tax credits and so forth, and hard to soft funding sources to do this, full Seabeds and Cook modernization, the funders immediately look to how much support is there in the town, and there's nothing that shows the support more than the town being willing to put some money, real dollar skin in the game there. So that's another reason for doing that. So the last part here is under federal law and statute, we can also use unneeded capital fund program funding for redoing Seabeds or repositioning Seabeds and Cook the way we're talking about. And so there's been an initial analysis done. Thank you very much for Steve for supporting that. And the balances in those accounts right now is 1.3 million from the federal capital fund. This is the 5-year plan that we approve every year and update every year on a rolling basis. There are $1.3 million worth of funded projects approved in that 5-year plan. The federal operating reserve, this is funds that are left over from our subsidy here for operations. And then Steve has been analyzing the bank accounts, our many bank accounts, as we know from monthly board meetings from Steve, and what is this about? What is that about? And discovered $157,801 sitting in 3 bank accounts that nobody's looked at since the early 2000s, and have to do with I called it surplus. We're probably going to rename it to be something more accurate. What is it? You told me. You said it was leftover.
It wasn't left over because it was surplus.
Yeah.
Section 8 reserves prior to 2004.
Right.
Prior to that date, prior to April of 2004, housing authorities could use that money for other housing purposes. In April of 2004, that was changed, but this money was taken out in 2000. So it's been in bank accounts for 22 years.
So going back 5 or 6 or 7 executive directors, I think we kind of lost track of that. So
Bet it wasn't in an IRA.
well, and we found some other bank accounts like that with escrow money that were collected in the early to mid 2000s from certain tenants who were putting money away for down payments and mortgages, and that came to our attention. And with one example of that that we've discussed behind, but there's like several other accounts there. So that's another cleanup item. Anyway, and then in theory, 5 and 6, and I made them orange, all orange, but this would probably be a different color. In theory, you can use the, get this right here, state, operating reserve or formula funding reserve. I'm not quite sure what the formula funding reserve is. This is what we're carrying, 212,000 is what we're carrying on the books for the state. And so that's just put down there for the sake of completeness. You'll see in a minute that we're not recommending looking at the state funding right now here. So in fact, what we are looking at is in this requested amount column here. If I can get this to, I guess it's not going to highlight very much, but if you look at this column that says requested amount lime green, remember that color. From those sources, what we are thinking is that we could find, maybe upwards of 3.272 million from all those sources, the CPA funding, the ARPA money that we've already got. Coming back to the federal operating reserve, one of the things is if you go through the 5-year plan that we have, it has in it as line items to fix the very things that we're going to be fixing after going through the repositioning with Seabeds and Cook. And it also has some things to be fixed at High Rock, not nearly enough money to make even a tiny dent on, for example, 5.3, category $1 million stuff that should be done for Seabeds. Should be done in the next 3 years, and 7.2 that should be done in the next 3 years at Cook. That's what the preliminary report said. And so literally, we won't be needing that money when we move out of the Section 9 program into the Section 8 program. We don't get to take that with us. So it is a candidate for use in funding the PRI, as long as we make sure, and really we have to depend on Steve and Gary to make sure that we don't take too much of it, so we have plenty for what we need for the next couple of years at Seabeds and Cook, and then also recognizing that High Rock Estates is 3 to 4 years out in the future, number one, and is in even worse kind of condition than Seabeds and Cook. So right now, there was about $1 million of the 1.3 million that was identified as a possible candidate. Right now, to make the budget work, we think, if we could repurpose $750,000 of those funds, that you'll see how it makes the budget that we just went over balanced here. And then, of course, the 150,000, 7,801 seems to be a no-brainer to dedicate to the PRI effort, to basically, fund a portion of what we need to do between now and the end of next year. And again, recognizing that you'll see, a little bit of explanation below in the notes, with the color coding there, and how it becomes 3.272. So keep that 3.272 line green number in your head. And then I'm going to come to section F, which is then we went through a mapping exercise where we took both the existing approved and committed funding sources of the previous first chart we went through. And then the requested funding sources, the potentially available funding sources, 1.25 is already there. But things like the CPA funding would need to be applied for in December and wouldn't be approved until May, and then not available, cash wise for expenditure until July 1, 2023. So we kind of have to work a year and a half ahead of the game, to take advantage of the CPA approval process by the CPC. And even though theoretically they could approve something in fall town meeting, generally as a rule, unless it's, the world is on fire and falling apart, they don't do a fall town meeting funding cycles here. So, we have to kind of work a year and a half ahead of time. If there's any funding that we think we need in the second half of 2023 or the first quarter of 2024, we've got to think about that now and apply for it in December this year. So remember I mentioned that we go back to the purple budget and we need, this is what our estimated expenditures are, 4.271 for these projects. And I've gotten rid of the the funding categories, and here's, without the, funding category, here's the very same budget in purple, 4.271. Okay. And then when I said, keep an eye on the lime green here, we're looking for 3.272 here to be applied to the lime green here, the 2.246 that we already have in section D. So 2.246 of funds that we've already approved, received, basically have available, and 3.272 in lime green on the next chart of funding that's on the table tonight for approval, along with approving this budget, use of this funding. And you find that then adds up to 5.59. 2 + 3 = 5. And then we took that 5.59 in another exercise, and we said, well, what would be the most sensible way of using that funding here, so that the amount of use equals 4.271 million, matches the 4.271 budget that we have before us tonight. And again, there was a lot of we built a tool to do what if analysis, and we iterated and we came up with this balance of funding on funding sources, where we would use $317,000 of the development reserve. We would expect to have 2.7 million from the Needham CPA, which includes both what we've already received to date, as well as what we would be asking for this December 1st. There's the 750,000 that we would be repurposing from our existing 5-year CPF funding. Here's the orphan funds, the 157,000 that Steve found under the mattress, when he was clearing out his office, and 28 Captain Robert Cook. And then of the 1.25 million, so we have, this shows, again, the lime green up here at the top shows that if we take the approval decisions tonight, this is what we're approving by way of funding. If we use the of the 1.25 million, if we can persuade Needham to step in with more CPA funding starting next July, we would only have to use $313,000 worth of our, ARPA funding, and keep the rest of the powder dry for future expenses, construction drawings, And then, of course, construction costs are estimated to be sort of in the $15 to $20 million range to do the first phase of construction if we get there. So then you go back here to the fuchsia color. I think this is fuchsia. Maybe somebody can correct me here. But if you come back to the last thing, that shows you basically if that we approve this tonight, we approve making this funding available. And we approve the uses of the funding, these uses of the funding, adding up to 4.271. We have a balanced budget. So this is the budget in purple, and this is the sources of funding in purple. And then we have left over, we have 1.248 million, which includes about half of the development reserve. And I'm going to talk about the rationale for that in a minute. And then we will have, $936,000 of our 1.2 million, 1.25 million still left to spend on future tasks for the Linden Chambers redevelopment. So, how did we do? What criteria did we use to, pick which funding source or which project? Well, one criteria is they're restricted. So, or they're unrestricted, or they're partially restricted. So I there's a little caption up at the top here. The NHA Development Reserve is unrestricted. We can use it for anything that we want to. So it's our most flexible source of funding. The Needham CPA can be used for both state and federal purposes in the PRI, but there's a fair amount of restrictions on the federal side that I described with the Emory Grover example. The Needham Housing Authority CPS funding, the 1.3 million we have there, we're looking to use 750,000 of it, can only be used for moving forward federally subsidized projects. So High Rock, Seabeds, and Cook. Again, likewise, the leftover money, 157,000 that we found under the mattress, Steve found, can only be used for federal purposes. The ARPA money, the 1.25, can only be used for state purposes. And I haven't really talked about the Partnership for Growth here because it's not real yet. But there's $1.5 million allocated out of the overall economic development bill. But it's just that, it's a placeholder, and we actually have to do a lot of work over the next year to go get it allocated and appropriated to us. And that hasn't been done at all. So we really haven't considered that whatsoever. And so what basically section G here says is there was a waterfall, a tier process where we used to do the what if analysis and to tinker around and do some modeling and so forth, where the top priority is to get see how much money from the Needham CPA is available to us, and recognizing that we're competing with other things like the other three buckets that you can use CPA funds for. Although there's been a lot of talk in the last year that those other three buckets have gotten a lot more than housing has. And we have the housing plan working group coming up with the final housing plan. So I think that the time is good for us to go forward with reasonable but largish requests for funding, especially since we have to show that the town of Needham is really financially supportive of both the Seabeds Cook modernization and the High Rock, and the Linden Chambers redevelopment in order to gain confidence of other funders that we're going to be talking to here. The second priority is to use up the pre-2004 surplus. Then the next priority is to look to the 5-year capital funding program money, totaling 1.3 million, and about $1 million could be, looks like it would be covered by the seabeds and Cook modernization that we were doing right after the repositioning. We're required to start that construction pretty immediately after the approval was reached. So, once we go through with this, we're heading for this modernization project here. And so if it really isn't needed after that, because we're going to be doing it, through the repositioning mechanism, then it's really available here. We don't have the final existing conditions property report, so we don't have the final numbers in terms of what is needed for each one of the properties, seabeds and Cook. So, again, like any plan or any budget, this is not going to be approved tonight and then sit on the shelf. We're going to need to, come back to it when major events happen, and at least quarterly, I think, for review. The NHA Development Reserve is our next, really 4 and 5 were in the same priority, in that the NHA Development Reserve is, our most flexible sum of money, source of funding, which, is only, completely under the control of the management and commissioners here. We don't have to ask anybody else's permission to do something with it here. And so but 5, which should probably, now that I look at it, should be 4B, or maybe it, switch the order. The ARPA Chapter 102 funds, 1.25 million. The feeling is that if we can tap into Needham CPA funds and first and gain support and approval at town meeting next spring, that keeps some of more of that money available for later phases when we're really going to have a heavy lift to try to find the $20 million of funding that we need to go forward with that phase 1 project. And then, as I mentioned, we have to do some work over the next few months to get that Partnership for Growth Economic Development Bill funding actually allocated and appropriated to us. A couple other comments. One is if and when we approve that, the thought is that there would be a regular quarterly update that we would use Cambridge Housing Authority to do, and it would not only be updating the budget estimates. When you're estimating something next summer, that in a year ahead of time, you're going to get better information as to what's that going to cost. And then we will also be doing all the expenditure accounting against this budget. So we'll have budget versus actuals to report on quarterly, maybe even monthly. We could need to, number 2 there, we need to make some accounting system changes. And I think also Steve is considering upgrading our accounting system so that we have a different system that has more flexibility for supporting something like what we're doing. So we'll hear more about that. And then we made a deliberate decision, I mentioned before, not to try to budget 2024 right now because it's just too far away and things are too uncertain. But we'll probably be looking sometime in the first quarter to take a first crack at that. And one of our quarterly budget reviews will add in 2024 and go through the same exercise of saying, where's the funding coming for it. So board is being asked to approve CHA task orders 2, 3, and 4 tonight, if the board deems that to be the right thing to do. And also this for iteration 4.5 of the budget. And the reason it is iteration 4.5 is there's been 4 major revisions since last May and 5 minor revisions to version 4 that came out a month ago, once we kind of figured out how to make this all work. And that's what we're going to be asking the board to think about and discuss tonight. So I've taken all the time, of course, but time for Cambridge Housing Authority. I'm going to come off a screen share here. And Margaret, can I turn the floor over to you and see if you have anything you wish to add here?
I don't want to take too much time because I want to make sure there's time for comments and questions, but I think you covered it well. Certainly my experience is that things may go faster, things may go slower, which is, I think, a good reason to have kind of the quarterly checkups that Reg had mentioned, because we'll either be, going at full steam ahead and outpacing ourselves because opportunity arises, or we're kind of be slower or go a little bit more systematically just because of the time considerations of other people's reviews, and it might be slower, and it would be good to get those check-ins. So, I think it's a great document. It really, between the task orders and the budget, I think gives the board a really detailed picture of what's the near future, and then what the next really almost 18 months will look like. And I think it's a great document and a great presentation.
Natalie, do you have anything you want to add? Our project manager, in case anybody's forgotten here.
So I would just add to, I echo what Margaret just said, and just wanted to add that it's really kind of charting a path forward for these projects, and it's based on certain assumptions that we have in terms of the timing, and those can change. It's also based on our experience working on different projects that are similar, but each project at the end of the day is its own project, and it can have some particular complexities, or it can be simpler in some ways. So, we've noted our assumptions in terms of, what the schedule is that is basically underlying these budget assumptions, as well as what, our kind of what we're basing the CHA's kind of hourly time spent on the project. But that, of course, will, as we get closer to those dates, we'll have better numbers for that.
Yes, that's it. So Steve, you're up next. Anything you want to add on behalf of management here?
Management, I would just say that this is quite a document, and you've heard a lot of numbers tonight. I think the ones that, budget is a plan. And I think there's flexibility in this plan over the next year and a half. If it's necessary, I think if they're realistic numbers, that it balances out with an extra potential income there, so that we're not going to fall in a perilous situation. And if it's checked on every month and every quarter, that should never happen. You have contingency of 1.2 million, particularly kind of built in, because the best that we could do right now on this is 5.5 million. We're budgeting for 4.2 million, so that kind of gives us that cushion where I feel safe with it. The accounting system that we have is probably capable of doing this, but we're going to check that with our software vendor, so that we can keep track of that in-house in real time too. But I just think that the task orders speak for themselves. It's what's got to be done. I think this is a step closer to making the dream of making truly affordable housing permanent here in Needham. These buildings were 50 and 60 years old, and with High Rock, eventually they're even older. But I think it really would leave a mark for those of us that love this town, and hopefully the CPA people will see it that way. The CPA funding should be, as I mentioned to Reg today, should be pretty flush, because there are houses selling and property selling in this town for a whole lot of money. So that fills those coffers, and I think this is an absolutely appropriate use of them to help keep people here and in perpetuity, to help make it available for Needham residents. I spoke to one gentleman here today. He's about 60 years old. He lives here with us at Linden Chambers. And he was telling me that his grandmother lives here as well. So
At Needham House.
at Needham House, yeah. Yeah, at Linden Chambers.
Back when they were brand new buildings and apartments, right?
Yeah. growing up in this town, I knew many people that lived here, both here and up on Linden Street, and, you know, I was in the board seat when, just after Cook's Bridge opened. So for me, this is, I just see this as a great opportunity, and if we manage it right, you know, this, as Margaret says, it tends to move a little faster. It moves faster when you have a real plan in place, and you have the support of the full board and the residents,
In the town.
and the town. So, I just, you know, I endorse this budget as it is. And we'll watch it.
Great. Why don't we open it up for board discussion and Q&A? Yes, Penny, go ahead first.
The funding, will that give us the base that will allow us to borrow?
Yeah, I actually read, I didn't put it in this report, but I ran some numbers. And the real number, caveat here, was not looked at by Cambridge Housing Authority. It was me just reading and rereading the report we got last February, okay? But, and trying to make sure we understood it, and we'll be getting into this next month in detail, but based on the numbers that were in that report, and again, we didn't have any of this existing conditions information we had. But understanding what we knew at the time, you know, working off the information we got from Abacus architects and consultants that did our master plan. The current subsidy funding that we're getting from for seabeds is $455,000 a year. The way it looked last February, which said, let's keep going on this, it's more like $794,000 a year if we move it to Section 8. So that's a $330,000 a year increase just from that. Likewise, for Cook, we go from $424,000 a year to $709,000 a year. That's a $285,000 a year increase. So between Cook and seabeds, it's $624,000 a year, plus we get another $100,000 of admin fee. So it's a total of $719,000 a year, rounding here. And if you borrow, you can, if we decide, and we probably wouldn't necessarily decide exactly this, but just by way of illustration, if we decide to use all of that extra subsidy just to borrow money, we could probably, for a 35-year mortgage at 4.75%, we could borrow about $12 million. And that's not counting any other sources of hard and soft funding that might be available. And we, again, these are just what we were, doing last fall, and last end of the year, just saying is worth keeping going here. Same sort of thing with High Rock. The way High Rock is looking, if you go under another one of the programs that seem to be appropriate for that, which we'll get into the Section 18, we go from $671,000 a year to $1.5 million a year for an $813,000 a year increase. That would support, another $13 or $14 million of the debt, which again, is not nearly enough to rebuild, redevelop all of that. But this is the power of this, this path that the Cambridge Housing Authority has been helping us go down and understand here. So a little bit more long-winded answer to your question, but I was interested in that and question myself. That's all. And these are my chicken scratching, and it can be completely disclaimed by Cambridge Housing Authority when we get their report mid next month here. More questions, Ed?
Considering the unplanned for inflation that we've suffered this year.
Right.
Is there an inflation factor built into our estimates?
So let me turn that over to Margaret or Natalie to answer that one.
I think where we're going to actually see the inflation is more on the construction side. So when we get the cost estimating from the AME firm as we move the projects forward, we're really going to see the impact of inflation. The other area that we've seen a lot of impact has been around the interest rates. For a long time, we've had a very low interest rate borrowing environment, but we've seen interest rates tick up quite considerably over the last year. And that's had a real dampening effect on the amount that folks can borrow. So when Reg said 4.75%, I said, sign me up, because we're seeing rates at 5.5 and 5.75 at this point.
And that's
So-
just in a year, right?
and
Since
that's
you-
just in a year. Yeah, we're working on a project right now, just to give you the extent, the interest rate has impacted our borrowing by $12 million in the course of the interest change from last year to this year. It's been about a 1.25%. So, the impact is substantial, both, based on the rising interest rates, but also on the construction costs increase. The other area where we've been seeing, and it costs more in time than money, has just been in the capacity of firms to actually move projects, because everybody is kind of challenged with hiring right now. We've had our own issues here in Cambridge. You guys have had some issues with hiring. Some of the architectural and engineering firms that we have, everybody's out looking, and it's a little bit of a challenge because, nobody's not quite at the full staff capacity as they want, but there's plenty of work going on. So has slowed some tasks up as a result, because there's a lot of work and not a lot of capacity.
Ed, Penny, Janice, do you have any questions or thoughts?
No.
No. Eleanor, you're up. Any thoughts or questions?
No, I think you answered questions that I had in your presentation.
Okay. So let's open the floor. We have two residents with us here, and Jim or Ross, do you have anything you want to?
Impressed with your planning, especially you try to stay ahead of the ball a year or 2 years and a half in advance. The only disturbing thing was, how can you lose track of some money in large sums? But the overall, I would give full pledge support. You're a great leader, Rich.
No, thank you, sir.
I just would, I don't think the money that Rich talked about, 157,000, I think you're referring to, it really wasn't lost, it was carried on the books.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was never accessed. It was actually a third of it, a quarter of it was accessed at some point. I'm not sure when. There were 4 banks. And back in 2000, there was $50,000 put in each of 4 banks.
Okay.
So at some point in the late 2000s, some 08 or 09, I think there was some taken out of one bank. But the other 3 have been sitting there. And I would submit to you that it's probably because folks really didn't know what it was for.
It was lost, but fine.
It was never lost. It was just kind of put on the, it was like behind the can of beans and the.
Let me just say for the record, actually, I got carried away. I know better than do this in a public meeting that's being recorded and has minutes. And has people watching, and I shouldn't be talking about under the mattress. Because certain people would take that seriously and say, yeah, and I was just doing tongue in cheek. And it is exactly the way Steve mentioned, which is, we have always known since I showed up, that about the developer fee. But the first time I heard that there were these other funds, I've known about the capital funding plan too, was when Steve, is just good, proper management on his part, starts to, goes through, he's been working his way through all the bank accounts, saying what's in this account, what's the, and so forth. And he's working on maybe consolidating the numerous accounts that we have, and we can get a better deal with the banks. And so I was amused to find that these funds had been sitting there for the last 10 years or plus that I've been focused on that, and I didn't know about it. So, that's shame on me here. So any other questions or comments, Ross?
I'm finished.
Yeah, I'd concur with what was just said. But I do have, especially if there's money available, then I guess there's a question about throughout all this. There's the consulting, there's the paperwork, there's the design, there's the strategizing. What money here can be used for real work? real labor in terms of maintenance, ongoing work that is needed right now. So that's just an overall question, because that's going to have to be resolved in the context of how would maintenance get done. For instance, if maintenance is, and also it reflects, it sort of points our way to a future. If we've had a problem, and I've been here almost 12 years, and everybody on the public saying, you know, it's not really maintained and so forth, it looks really bad, it's not healthy, and so forth. If that has been a problem, then our future design ought to address maintenance. For instance, if maintenance has been a problem, let's come up with a design that eliminates maintenance. Now, I don't know how to do that, but
Yeah, I don't
that's a
That's
question.
probably an extreme, but you're right,
Well-
make it as maintenance free as possible. And that's-
Something like that.
and
I
it's
mean,
certainly
if
something
maintenance
that-
is a problem, let's eliminate maintenance, you know? Or figure out a solution where
Well,
we
you
can
know,
handle maintenance.
it's actually a very reasonable point to make, because one of the benefits of going through a major modernization at Seabeds and Cook and redeveloping, you know, at least a phase one here at Linden Chambers, is those will be brand new units with brand new appliances and brand new everything, all under warranty from the, you know, from the constructor. And our maintenance load will go down just by definition. We're not dealing with old plumbing and old wiring and old toilets. And we're, you know, there's going to be air conditioning in these buildings and elevators, and, you know, things will not be falling apart all the time. And so just by definition, that point you're making will happen if we can succeed in pulling this off.
And
Well,
one of the factors, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
might be the quality of the item purchased.
Exactly. And well, you know, there'll be a lot of involvement, particularly, you know, I mentioned this to Jim at the picnic this afternoon, but you know, every time I talk about this, you know, we, the board, we, the management, need to be recruiting a good resident advisory committee for Linden Chambers and another one for the Seabeds and Cook down the road. And having gone through one of these projects before myself, it can be absolutely invaluable for communications, for suggestions, for figuring out better ways of doing things, including picking, you know, seemingly very innocuous things like the kind of blinds that you have on the windows. And we got into my favorite story is we got into a huge discussion with the type of toilets we're going to order. You know, are they high versus low? Are they elongated versus not? You know, and you know, it may seem somewhat funny, but those are logical, normal decisions that we all make when we renovate our bathrooms. You know, and so anyway, anything else,
I think,
Ross?
yes. The town, I think, has gone through changes and growth. They've become more sophisticated. For instance, I believe it was after the Pollard School, some of the issues there that nobody seems to want to remember about indoor air quality and so forth. Became a big brouhaha, and the result of that was the formation of the Permanent Public Buildings Committee. or something
Exactly.
like that, whereby the town was able to create a group that brought a more sophisticated approach to it. And I think that's the opportunity here. We look back from, you know, what we can glean from the newspapers and so forth, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, there were good citizens, intelligent. They got together exactly the way we're getting together now, and they produced the best housing that they could at the time. Now, what are we going to do to change it to make up for their, I don't want to say failures, but they're lacking? You know, how are we going to make better housing? And the housing was very good at that time. It was standard housing. There was no state building code, for instance. That didn't come in until the 1970s. So they were doing the best job that they could. I think the whole town has become much more sophisticated about everything. And it makes things more complicated, but that's necessarily so. I think we're going to have to deal with sustainability questions, energy questions, climate change. We haven't
And can
talked
I
about
say,
a lot of
I know
that
you've read the Yes, and all those topics are in the RFS, so.
But one thing I did want to say.
And your time is up, so be making a quick one, because we got to get back to the budget
Well, what I
here.
wanted to lead off with, a statement that Steve may be the best thing that's happened to the Needham Housing Authority.
I'm gonna rule that out of order, that's outside the four corners
I'll
here.
tell you why.
No, hey,
I'll
so,
tell you why. There's some
Thank you,
specifics.
Ross.
Very first thing that he did was come over on weekends, drive around, look at things, and he removed the bituminous rubble that was cluttering
So,
out the parking lot.
Ross,
It should have been.
budget
obvious.
comments. Yeah, I know, yeah, you're, Steve, here's the thing, Ross, we want to keep, we're already getting a little bit late. And you know what, can I build off of your point and then we can move
No, I'd
on?
like to just finish my thought and then I'll be done. It'll
All
be
right.
about 2 minutes.
All
okay?
right,
Thank you.
yeah,
And the second thing is the most recent thing. Steve, you removed the snow plows from there. They started off over there. People complained about them.
Ross,
over here,
this is
and so
really
forth. So that's
outside
a
the
real
four
good thing.
corners
The other
here.
thing I
please.
wanted to mention, that there was no public notice posted about this meeting.
Right,
And the only reason I didn't go to the Attorney General to follow up on previous complaints about this very issue was that we had a wonderful barbecue,
So-
we had a band. I was thoroughly distracted. We had a wonderful
So,
time.
Ross,
And I think it's.
that is within the four corners of the meeting, and I just want to let you know that I personally checked that the notice was posted with the town clerk. And so it was publicly posted.
It wasn't on this bulletin board.
The requirement is to post it in the town clerk's office, and where you
Well,
noticed it,
that
you
wasn't
told
the
me that.
agreement After the last time I filed
So,
a complaint.
A mistake
And-
was made, but I'm just saying, that is within the four corners there. I'm sorry, I'm glad you found out about it. But it was, just for the record, it was publicly posted on time.
Yeah, and also.
I
for the
personally
record,
check
was
it.
Not posted here.
Great. Okay, so let's see if we don't have any other commissioner comments. Are we comfortable, and if somebody would take the lead to make a motion, two motions ahead, to move, first we have to make a motion to approve the work to be done. And then to make a motion to approve the budget sources and uses of funds to do that work. So do I hear a motion to approve task orders 2, 3, and 4?
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ellen.
Oh, Eleanor jumped in, good. So would you like to second, Penny?
I'll second.
A second, okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, being a virtual meeting, we have to do a roll call vote. I'm gonna call on Eleanor first because I'm looking at her on the screen here.
Eleanor Evans, I.
Janice,
Janice Bennett votes aye.
Ed Scheidler,
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk,
Penny Kirk votes aye.
and Reg Foster votes aye. So great. And the executive director is authorized to sign those task orders tomorrow. Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the budget that we just reviewed. Do I have a motion on that?
I'll make a motion that we approve this budget.
Janice Bennett does approves, so makes a motion. Who seconds it?
I'll second.
Ed Scheidler seconds it. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the roll. Janice Bennett,
Janice Bennett votes aye.
Ed Scheidler,
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk,
Penny Kirk votes aye.
and Eleanor Evans.
Eleanor Evans, I.
Reg Foster votes aye, so that's a unanimous vote. Thank you very much. How exciting is this? It's been a
Very.
long time coming. Okay, we're gonna move on briefly to the other agenda item that I was not comfortable submitting the comments that I submitted on behalf of the board, so I submitted them on behalf of myself. Is there any additional comments or embellishments or corrections or anything that anybody has here? And
Typos, but I'm not gonna-
typos, yeah. Typos, they're looking for big concepts, right, Ed? They want to, they were asking the boards and committees to make sure, to review this, to make sure that, the planning working group is on the right track, and the next thing we're going to be seeing sometime later this fall is a soup to nuts draft here. These are just critical sections that were under review this summer. just to take a moment to leaf through. And if you want, if you have a marked up copy, you can kind of just leave it with me if you'd like, and I'll get it into. Except for the typos, I think, you know.
I have a question. On page 10, there's a reference to down in the chart with severe burdens, and my question is, what constitutes a severe burden?
So page 10, can you just read that comment here? It comment RF 21,
Yes.
and let me see here.
Yeah, every category has its severe burden.
So I'm looking for the severe burdens comment.
I didn't see it mentioned there, unless I missed it in the RF 21.
So you're not, can you, is there something in the wording of the comment you're referring to, or is it something else?
No, it just is listed in the, under the unmet.
Oh, I
needs part
see,
of that.
there, okay.
And I'm just wondering.
Oh, yeah, that's not very well explained. I think that could be clarified,
Okay.
but I did ask Karen Sonnenberg what that meant, and it said that the unmet need, let's just take that first line. You know, we have individuals of extremely low income.
Right.
So they make 30% of MEMI and less. So that individual would be making 30% of $74,000. So maybe $22,000 a year.
Mhm.
Okay. 245 of them are in units where they're paying 30% of their income
Mhm.
for their monthly rent. Probably most of them with us, you know, our 152 plus, you know, the 46 over at Seabeds.
Right.
And there, and of that 450 units, 215 people are paying more than 30%. They're severely burdened, you know, so they're paying 50 or 60%
Okay.
of their monthly rent, of their income on, just to have a place to put, you know, lie down and sleep. That's what severe burdens, that number in each one of these categories is people who are paying a lot more.
Okay, I had misinterpreted this as referring to Needham Housing, but it's referring to the town.
Yes,
Okay, that makes sense now.
right, right. Not us, yeah, right. Any other thoughts or comments or?
No, I thought you did a very
Okay.
thorough job of responding.
Eleanor, do you have anything you wanted to say or add, or?
Did you get that paperwork?
No, I thought you did a great job. Thank you for taking the time to do that.
All right. So hearing that, I'm gonna just, I don't know if we need a vote for this because this is just comments on a draft. But I'm gonna get back to the planning director and Karen Sonnenberg and the chair, the co-chairs of the committee saying that we had a chance to review it as a board, and this is the board's position on this draft. And then Ed will be able to be in the meetings. I forget when the next meeting is, but it's sometime early next month, I think.
Unfortunately, I'm gonna miss that one too. We're gonna be in Ireland.
Oh,
Next meeting
oh,
for the housing
lucky you.
planning board.
All right,
You can always zoom in.
you could.
That's right.
It would be 3 o'clock in the morning in Ireland or something like that, you know, so. Okay, I think we're at the end of our agenda. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So
I make a motion to adjourn.
And we have a motion moved by Ed and seconded by Penny. Hearing no further discussion, except that I want to thank Margaret Moran and Natalie and the entire Cambridge team. We couldn't, not in a million years could we get this far without their help.
I think we made a very wise choice when we all agreed that we wanted.
Well, you were on the selection committee and you were, you know, swept off your feet, I remember here. And, but, you know, we really appreciate not only the, you know, technical competence and knowledge that they bring to everything we've been doing in the last 14 months, but also they have really good bedside manner as well as consultants. Maybe that's because they're not really real consultants, they're real public housing people instead. I don't know what it is. Probably just because they're very nice and genuine people themselves. And they really, really do care about making the world a better place when it comes to providing more deeply affordable housing all over the Commonwealth, not just here in Needham. So on behalf of the whole board, thank you very much.
Thank you very
Kudos for
much
getting us
indeed.
through the first year. It's going to get, I believe, even more exciting and interesting in the upcoming year. Is that a fair statement? Do you have anything you want to say, Margaret? before
Well, Reg, thank you very much for the kind words, and it's really been a pleasure to work with the Needham Housing Authority staff and with you. I think we managed to get a fair amount of things accomplished this year, and I'm really excited about what the next 12 months look like. And of course, you know, the secret sauce for the CHA is Natalie, and she's been doing a tremendous job in terms of project managing the Needham work, and I really can't thank her enough as well for her daily and many contributions. So, but it's
There's
been
a third person I'd like to mention, Joe Lorenz,
Yeah.
who also, Natalie and Margaret take all the credit for the good things that are going on, but Joe is the one who
Joe's really the one doing.
did all the work.
That's why we gave him the night off.
Okay, people, I'm gonna call the roll. Eleanor, should we adjourn?
Eleanor Evans, aye.
Penny,
Penny Kirk, aye.
Ed,
Ed Scheidler, aye.
Janice,
Bennett, aye.
and Rich Foster votes aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Great meeting.
Oh,
See ya next month.
Yeah,
Put a lot
Have
of
a
work
great
into
Labor
it,
Day.
Reg.
I could even understand that.